What is up, guys? Jake W here, and as promised, we are going to go over some tips for fishing at night from a kayak with Flairhawk jigs around bridges and heavy structure. It's a very unique style of fishing, and I've got a lot of questions in the comments section, so we are going to cover some of the tips that you guys have been asking for. But before we get into that, I want to talk safety. Safety always comes first when kayak fishing, and that is especially true when kayak fishing at night. So we're going to cover, first of all, 4 items that I recommend that you have on your person when you kayak fish at night. Now, 3 of those items are actually required by the US Coast Guard, so we are going to cover those 3 first. And obviously, the first item that you must have on your person is a personal flotation device. Now, technically, it just needs to be on your kayak. It could be in the front hatch or in the rear tank well underneath the bungees, and you would be following the law. However, I highly recommend that you wear your PFD. It's only going to benefit you if you are wearing it, if you are struck unconscious by a careless boater, or if you slip off your kayak and hit your head on a piling and are knocked unconscious. The only way it's going to help you is if you're wearing it. Now, in some of my older videos, you might have noticed I didn't always wear my PFD. And a good friend of mine actually, my dog is drinking water over there, a good friend of mine has actually called me out for that, and I listened to him. From that point on, you've always noticed that I wear my PFD. I don't want to give a bad impression, especially to younger viewers who may be looking at what I'm doing and thinking it's the right way. What I do is not always the right way, guys, but I'm going to try to do my best going forward. Now, the idea with a PFD is get one that you like wearing, get one that fits you nice, that's good and comfortable, and get one that has features that you're going to actually appreciate. In my case, I like having the pockets so I can carry a lot of items with me. I have my wallet and keys in this pocket, and I zip that up and I never open it when I'm on the water. That way, even if I lose my entire kayak, when I get back to my vehicle at the end of the day, I've still got my wallet and keys. Now, in the other pocket, I keep items that I use frequently, like my leader material, an extra set of pliers, and my cell phone, if I ever need to look at the GPS on my phone to figure out where I am in the 10,000 islands, or if I just need to answer a text or a phone call. All right, so the second item that you're required by the US Coast Guard to have when kayak fishing is actually a whistle. Very easy, you can get one of these for $1 or $2. I used to keep it in the pocket here, so you didn't know that I had it, but it was always there all along. But from going forward, I'm gonna have it right here so that everybody can see that it's on my person. Now, the third item that the US Coast Guard requires you to have is some kind of signal light, and that's applicable when you're kayak fishing at night. So the idea is that you can point this at an oncoming boat, strobe it back and forth like this, and get their attention. That combined with the whistle should be able to get pretty much anybody's attention. Now again, I used to have this here in the pocket, but going forward, I'm gonna have it right here where everybody can see it. And I've also found that that's helpful because when I'm retying at night, I can just click it on and it lights up my whole belly area here in my hands so I can see what I'm doing. All right, now that fourth item that I recommend, but that's not required by the US Coast Guard, is some sort of knife. Now, if you're ever anchored up and somehow it gets wrapped around your ankle or something and then you fall overboard, you need to be able to cut yourself free quickly. So I have it right here in the open on my zipper, and it easily comes out of the sheath. The sheath holds it very securely when it's not in use, but the blade is actually made from a ceramic material, so it will never rust. It's another item that I would recommend having, even though it's just a slight possibility. It's handy to have it there for cutting bait and other things as well. So now I'd like to talk about one other item that I recommend that you have, one other safety item that I recommend that you have when you're kayak fishing at night. And this isn't something that should be attached to your person, and it's not even something that's required by law. I mentioned that the only thing that they require for lighting is a signal light that you can point at somebody. But I recommend having a 360 light like this that's on at all times. Now, the idea is that it should be long enough that when you have this, in my case, I put it in a rod holder. It's actually made from an old surf rod that I found broken in somebody's garbage. But the idea is to get it elevated up above your head so that no matter what direction you're facing, a boat can see this light from any direction. That's why it's called a 360 light. You notice that this really lights up. There's no way a boat's gonna miss me on the water when I have this on. So this is on at all times when I'm on the water at night. Now, the reason why I recommend one of these is you don't have to fumble around looking for a light every time a boat's passing by, especially if you're hooked up to a big fish or in the middle of doing something else. The last thing you want to have to do is look and see where that boat is, which direction he's coming from, and then fumble around for a flashlight. This is on at all times, so boats should be able to see you. You still got to have your head on a swivel when you're fishing at night. Make sure that boats can see you. If they don't, then you have the option of the whistle and the signal light. But this is definitely something that I recommend that you view as required gear when you're fishing at night. All right, so now let's talk about a piece of equipment that you sometimes see people rig on their kayaks that is actually dangerous to have on your kayak at night. And that's the red and green bow light. Now this white 360 light is commonly referred to as a stern light because it goes out back. And the red and green light is referred to as your bow lights because they're out on the front of the boat. So that red and green light on the bow helps other boats determine which direction another boat is traveling. And it's required on powered vessels, boats that are able to make quick changes of direction. Canoes, kayaks, rowboats are not able to make quick changes of direction and get out of the way of other boats. So you're only supposed to have the white light. The red and green light gives the false impression that you are able to yield and get out of their way. Now, if a large boat sees only a white light, they assume that either you are at anchor or that you are too slow to get out of their way, and so they will actually yield to you even though you're the smaller vessel. But if they see a red or a green light, they're going to assume that you are a small vessel equipped with a motor that's capable of yielding to them, the larger vessel, and so they may not yield to you until the last moment when they realize what you actually are. You don't want that to happen. Just have the white light so that they won't make the false assumption that you are capable of getting out of their way. All right, guys, so now that we've covered safety, let's get to the part you've been looking forward to. Let's talk tips and technique. Some of the more common questions that I get involve the tackle I'm using. So let's start off by talking about tackle. This is my flat setup. It's what you see most guys out on the flats with. A 2500 or 3000 size reel. Look how small that is compared to my hand. That's the most common reel you see out there on the flats. And then often you'll see either a medium or a medium light rod. I use a medium light rod. This is not what you want to use to target big snook under bridges with Flairhawk jigs. Yes, you can land a 40-inch snook with this rod on the flats. However, if you try to do it under a bridge in 25 feet of water with heavy structure around, you're either going to get broke off or your gear is going to fail. And I can tell you that from experience. First of all, a rod like this, if you look at the line rating on it, it's only rated for 8 to 20 pound braid. Now you're typically going to be using 30 or 40 pound braid throwing Flairhawk jigs. Also, look at the lure rating. This is rated for a 1/8 to 3/4 ounce lure. You're going to be throwing Flairhawk jigs like this that are 1.5 to 2.5 ounces. You could easily break a rod tip just throwing the lure with a setup like this. So this is more in line with what you want to use when you're throwing Flairhawks, regardless of whether you're doing it from shore or from a kayak. Guys use heavy gear for throwing these jigs. First of all, you need gear that's capable of throwing this jig. And also you need to be able to beat the fish fast because they are near heavy structure around those bridges. Now guys that are fishing from shore, typically you'll see them using 8, 9, even 10-foot rods because they're trying to throw these jigs all the way out into the middle of the channel from the shoreline. However, from a kayak, you just need to make sure that your rod is stout enough to handle those fish. You don't need to throw the jig that far because you can get the kayak right up to where the fish are. So I go with a 7-foot to a 7'6" rod. Sometimes a 7'6" is nice because you can reach it around the front of the kayak when you're fighting a fish. You saw when I was fighting that tarpon recently, I was using a 7-foot rod just like this one. And sometimes it was hard for me to get the tip of this rod around the front of that kayak. So a 7'6" might be better for some, but anything in that range that's comfortable on a kayak, 7 foot to 7'6" is what most kayak fishermen like. Now, as far as the line rating, again, you want to look for something that's rated for 30 or 40 pound braid. And a lot of rods will also list the lure rating. This particular one is rated for up to 2.5 ounce lures. So I got no problem throwing my favorite 1.5 ounce Flairhawk jig with this rod. You don't have to worry about breaking a tip. Reel, I use a Penn Conflict 5000 is my preferred reel. I also use a 4000 in some situations. Yeah, you might be able to land a 40-inch snook with a Flairhawk jig on a 3000 reel and a medium light rod, but before you land that one 40-inch snook, you're probably gonna lose 10 of them to the structure, which means that you're leaving all those fish with hardware in their mouth for no reason other than the fact that you're trying to be cool, catching them on light gear. Use the right size gear for what you're targeting. All right, so let's talk about the jigs themselves. Everybody wants to know what color of jig I'm using. I use all different colors. Now my go-to color, I will admit, is this one, white with a white body and a blue tail. Now the brand that I've been using recently is JamFab Jigs. They're not sponsoring me, it just happens to be what my local hardware store has been carrying, and they've been working great. They got nice sharp hooks. Most of these Flairhawk jigs have very large sharp hooks. Let me show you one that's out of the package. These are big sturdy hooks. You can land tarpon, Goliath grouper. I'm not saying you're gonna land a 500-600 pound Goliath grouper, but you know, 100, 150 pounder, you could probably land them on this hook, and they're very sharp as well. So as far as color goes, I think color is designed more to catch us than the fish. They want us to buy multiple ones, so they make all these different colors. I think the fish are reacting more to the vibration that this makes in the water. If you just drop this in the water, in the current, facing into the current like that, and hold onto the rod, you're gonna feel this buzzing vibration. It feels like you're touching a beehive. Now that vibration is what makes the fish bite this. As it passes by them, they feel it with that lateral line. Snook have that big, thick lateral line. They feel that vibration and they just react to it. I don't think the color has anything to do with it, especially since you're fishing in the dark. I don't think they actually see it. Okay, so we've covered tackle now. I've talked about the jigs. I've talked about the rod and reel that I use. The other big question I get is about my retrieve. People have actually insinuated, because I never show my retrieve on video, they've insinuated that I have some kind of secret technique that I don't want you to know about. That couldn't be further from the truth. The reason I don't show my retrieve on video very often is because it's dark. I'm fishing in the dark. I don't leave the light on all the time because I've noticed that the boats around me that have their lights on, they're not catching fish. When I have my light off and it's nice and dark, that's when I tend to catch fish. So what I do is when I hook up to a snook, I reach up, I turn on the camera, I turn on the light, and I start recording. If I left it on the whole time I was there, my light would probably die, and then I wouldn't have it when I actually needed it. So, sorry I'm not showing you my retrieve, guys, but I don't have one secret retrieve. There's a variety of different retrieves you need to learn, because on different nights, they go for different things. So one of my go-to retrieves is just kind of a steady retrieve at about the speed that'll keep the lure right off the bottom, about a foot off the bottom. And then every now and then I'll just give it a quick little jerk like that. It's not the type of jerk that you impart to jerk bait, like a jerk shad or a big hard plastic jerk bait. It's more of just trying to make the rod tip wobble. For some reason, when that rod tip wobbles like that, it imparts an action to the lure that drives the snook nuts. But as I said, that's not the only retrieve I use. Sometimes I just do a straight retrieve, keeping it off the bottom when my wrist starts to hurt. Also, another retrieve that a lot of people like to do is just a couple cranks, and then you stop, pause for a second, and then crank it again. So you're just kind of intermittently reeling and stopping, reeling and stopping. And what that does is it makes sure that you're keeping the lure down on the bottom. Every time you reel it, it's going to come up a little bit, and then when you stop, it sinks back down. So you make sure that you're staying in contact with the bottom and keeping the jig down near the bottom where the big snook are. So let's talk about that. Where are the big snook? They're all over the place. All right, they're not always in one location. Sometimes they're way out away from the bridge, and other times they're right on the structure. It just depends on the night, and there's different variables that we are not attuned to that they are attuned to. So sometimes it's hard to figure out why they're doing what they're doing, but all you got to do is just fish everywhere and figure out where they are that night. Typically though, the big ones are down on the bottom. Snook are built to lay on the bottom and eat things that float over the top of their head. If you look at the way their head is shaped, their eyes are up near the top, kind of like a frog almost, and then their jaw is underslung. Their lower jaw is much bigger than their upper jaw, and that allows them to inhale stuff when they come up from underneath it. So they like to lay on the bottom and catch stuff that floats right over the top of their head. So that's why you're trying to retrieve that lure a foot or two off the bottom. That's where the snook are going to see it. That's not always the case though. Sometimes they'll be up on the surface busting bait. Just depends on what they're eating that night. If there's a lot of shrimp up near the lights, they may be blowing up all over the surface. So you got to be ready to fish where the fish are. So you're probably starting to sense a theme here. There's not some secret color or secret technique or secret location where you're going to find the fish. These fish are found on bridges all over the place. A lot of people want to know what bridge I'm fishing in each video. I fish the majority of the time at one particular bridge because that happens to be the closest location to me. But there's big snook like that on any big bridge over saltwater in South Florida. You're going to find big snook. All right, so now that we've covered tackle and technique, let's talk about positioning. The other big question people want to know is, how do I keep my kayak in position when I'm fishing heavy current like that? And why don't I ever use an anchor in my videos? Well, to answer that question, I'm going to have to use some visual aids. So let's go to my computer and I'm going to show you why I don't use an anchor and how I like to position my kayak. All right, guys, so hopefully this helps you visualize how I like to set up. We've got a bridge over salt water. Typically, you're looking for a bridge that's connecting the mainland to a coastal island, or perhaps it's running between two different coastal islands. So this is a saltwater pass that gets a lot of heavy tidal current. So the arrows are indicating the direction of the tidal flow, and obviously these are our snook, and the red object is our kayak. Yes, I intentionally made the snook almost as big as the kayak because any self-respecting kayak fisherman is trying to catch fish that are nearly the size of his kayak or bigger, right? All right, so let's talk about positioning. The way that we have it set up right here is how I typically try to position. I like to be downstream from where I think the fish are, and then I cast upstream. Let me grab my yellow Power Pro here. So I cast upstream beyond the fish and retrieve it back towards their faces with the current. It's important to retrieve the lure, these Flairhawk jigs. You want to retrieve it with the current because that keeps the jig down on the bottom and allows it to have a natural action. It also means that you're bringing it right towards the fish's face because fish always orient nose into the current. That's how they are able to exert the least amount of energy. That's how they're the most streamlined. So they're always nose into the current, just like you are. You don't have your kayak sitting sideways because the current would push you right away. You put your nose into the current so that you have to exert the least amount of energy. All right, so I cast upstream and retrieve it back towards the fish. All right, so let's talk first of all about why I don't anchor up. So if we're set up like this in a perfect position to throw up current and retrieve back towards the fish's face with the current, let's grab a black anchor rope here. You'd have to run your anchor trolley all the way up to the nose of the kayak. You'd have to paddle up here somewhere, drop the anchor, and you would end up with something like this. You'd end up where you want to be. Your anchor would be out in front of you because of the direction of the current. And if you hooked a fish, he's going to run towards the structure here, which is going to pull you right on top of your anchor. So the anchor is not going to prevent the fish from pulling you towards the structure because it's on the wrong side of your kayak. What's going to happen is you're going to end up with a bunch of slack anchor line underneath you, and the fish that's running back and forth in a panic is going to get all fouled up in your anchor rope and cut you off. On top of that, you got to keep in mind that typically these passes will have 20-25 feet of water in them, and so you have to use 50 feet of rope minimum to anchor effectively. If you have your anchor line running straight down, it's not going to catch. It's just going to bump along the bottom. So when I first experimented with anchoring here, I had to use a 50-foot rope, and it was just a big mess having 50 feet of rope on your deck every time you wanted to move, and then having to deploy that much rope and retrieve that much rope every time you wanted to move. I'm usually only making 5 to 10 casts at a given location before I want to move on and try somewhere else. So that's a lot of work, deploying that anchor over and over again. You're making a lot of noise, you're splashing in the water, you're making noise on the bottom every time the anchor hits. I just didn't catch fish when I anchored up. And I found that it didn't help me stay away from the structure because the fish would just pull you right over the top of your anchor. It was a lot of work. Now, I'm not going to lie, the method that I use now is a lot of work too. Basically, what I have to do is paddle my kayak up to about here, which allows me to make one cast under the bridge and target fish on this side. And then usually by the time that I finish the retrieve, I'm right about here. I'm able to make one more cast and retrieve it again. And then by then I'm all the way back here out of range. And so I have to paddle all the way up forward again just to make 2 more casts. So yes, it's a lot of work. But just like your daddy told you, hard work is what pays off. It's definitely worth it. In the long run, you catch more fish using this method than you do anchoring up. Trust me, I tried anchoring up and I just never caught fish when I used that anchor. Now you might wonder, well, why don't you just move the kayak like you always see the boats doing? All the boats are on the other side of the bridge from me. They're over here and they've got their anchor line run out the back of the boat, so it's out of the way of the fish, and the current's pulling them this way, so the anchor is out behind them and they're able to target all these fish out in the open without the anchor getting in the way. Why is that working for the boats? Well, because they're not using jigs, they're throwing live bait. So let's grab our yellow Power Pro again. This is what they're doing. They're dropping a bait right here, opening up the bail and just letting the bait drift out right past all the structure and right towards the fish. Very natural presentation. So yes, anchoring up is effective when you're using live bait because you're able to flip everything around. But using the jigs, you have to be downstream because the jigs are designed to work with the current. So anchoring just is not effective. The few guys that I see out there on boats throwing these jigs, they're doing the same thing that I'm doing. They have a trolling motor and they're just kind of trolling up to the bridge, making a few casts, and then using that trolling motor to maintain their position, and then they just keep moving from piling to piling, from structure to structure, looking for the fish. So obviously now that I have my pedal drive kayak, things are much easier. All I have to do is use my feet to maintain my position, and I can just keep casting and casting and casting on a spot as long as I want without ever having to stop and reach for a paddle. I just keep pedaling with my feet. And also when I hook up with a fish, I just start pedaling backwards and I pull them right away from the structure. Now let's talk about what's going to happen when you hook up with one of these fish in a paddle kayak. All right, so a regular paddle kayak. When you hook up one of these fish, let's say we hook this guy right here. When you hook that fish, he's going to run towards the structure. Even if it's up current, he's going to run towards that structure. And you might think that that current is going to help you keep him away. That's false. All right, I'm sure it's helping tire out the fish, but he is very capable. Even an upper slot snook, and definitely the over slots, they are capable of pulling you against the current and right into that structure. They're very strong fish, much stronger than you think they are. And your kayak doesn't offer that much resistance when it's oriented like this. When you pull back, your kayak actually shoots forward in the direction that the keel is oriented. So I'm going to show you a clip of that happening to me. There's one. Okay, so as you can see here, the fish is having no problem pulling me upstream. Keep in mind the current's flowing the opposite direction that we are traveling right now. So he's pulling me upstream, attempting to get me into those pilings. But fortunately, because I have heavy enough gear, I was able to steer him. So then he attempted to keep going upstream here for a little while. Eventually he tires and he decides to turn and head downstream towards the pilings this time. So I'm starting to kind of turn around again. And now we're pointed at the pilings again. He's making one last attempt. But again, my gear is heavy enough, my rod is heavy enough, and I have enough drag set on my reel that I was able to pull him back just in the nick of time. My kayak actually bumps into the pilings there. So you can see that with the paddle drive, when you're fighting a fish, you don't have a lot of control over what happens to your kayak. Your best defense is just to have heavy enough gear that you can kind of steer the fish and subdue him. So now the fish is already tired. He's floated up to the surface.
It's a big one.
I'm super excited about the size of this fish. This is one of the larger ones I caught. I'll let you see a picture of him in a minute here, once I land him. Still trying to get him in the net. Now at this point, the current's already drifting us back because the fish is no longer pulling on us. We got him in the net. I'll show you a quick picture of him. So one other question people sometimes ask is, why don't I just quickly deploy an anchor right after I hook up? Well, you saw how fast that all happened. And again, I'm fishing in
25 feet of water. So I've seen people use that technique on the flats. They might have like a little 8 to 10 foot section of rope with a 5 pound weight that they just throw out when they hook up. But in 25 feet of water, again, I mentioned I need 50 feet of rope to anchor up there. By the time I get that anchor deployed, I already would have been into the pilings, so it would not be effective in this situation.
37. All right, so that was actually a pretty large snook. I think that was a 37 incher that did that, but like I said, even an upper slot snook is capable of doing something like that. It's happened to me many times back when I had my paddle kayak. So how do you avoid that happening? Well, this is what I finally learned towards the end of my time in my Vibe paddle kayak. You can take advantage of a feature that many paddle kayaks are equipped with, and that's a rudder. My Vibe had a rudder on it. If you don't have a rudder, it's definitely going to help you. If you're not ready to upgrade to a pedal kayak yet, think about investing in an inexpensive rudder system, because this is what you'll be able to do. As soon as you hook that snook, you can just reach down and turn your rudder hard right or hard left, and you'll be able to turn your kayak broadside like this. And that's going to make you have much more resistance in the current. Also, when you pull back on your rod, your kayak is just going to move in the direction of the keel, left or right, depending on which direction you're facing. Your kayak always moves in the direction of your keel. It's very odd. You can have a fish out here. You can be hooked up to a fish. Let me illustrate it here. You can be hooked up to this fish out here. And if you're pointed towards the fish, when you pull back, your kayak shoots towards the fish. But if you're pointed this way when you pull back, your kayak is actually going to shoot that way, towards the shoreline, which is better than getting pulled towards the structure. So you can use your rudder to your advantage when you're fighting these large fish, if you have one. If you don't have a rudder, well, just expect to experience something like I did. Hold on and enjoy the ride. It's going to get your heart pumping, but trust me, if you have the right gear, you have the heavy enough rod and reel, you will be able to subdue that fish just in the nick of time, just like you saw me do there.
So when I first started filming this, I envisioned it being like a 10 or 15 minute video. Then I soon realized I have a lot more to say on this subject than I thought I did. It's something that's very dear to me because we developed these techniques over the last couple of years with a lot of trial and error. I learned a lot by going to Sebastian Inlet and watching the real pros throw Flairhawk jigs from the shoreline. I also learned a lot by watching other YouTubers, guys like JC from Rad Reeling Fishing. He's been catching big lunker snook around bridges using Flairhawk jigs for years now, and I learned a lot by watching his videos. He actually subscribed to our channel recently because he's been getting into kayak fishing the last year or so. That was very flattering to me since I learned so much by watching him. Now, one of my big goals this year is to get on a big 40-inch snook, put it on film and measure it on film. I see a lot of guys on YouTube catch decent sized snook, hold them up, and say that they're 40 inches without actually measuring them. A lot of them you look at and you're like, yeah, those are barely over slot. But I want to actually put it on film. There's a few guys out there that have done it. Guys like JC, who I mentioned earlier, has caught some real lunker snooks and proven it on film. Hey, if you watch this all the way to the end, I appreciate you. I know it was kind of long. Thanks for watching though. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will catch you next time.